What if I told you that for the next 4 days, you could rewire your brain in a way that redirects your entire life, not through some abstract philosophy, but through something you've done your whole life? Talking to yourself, you are already doing it right now, every moment. But here's the question: what is the quality of that conversation? Is it precision guided toward growth and resilience? Or is it careless, undisciplined, soaked in doubt, shame, and hesitation? The next 4 days, I want you to talk to yourself with intention, with clarity, and with unapologetic authority. Because when you do, your brain listens, your nervous system listens, your life listens. Every time you say, I am focused, your brain begins to filter distractions. Wait. Every time you say, I am built for this, your physiology adapts to that command. This isn't motivational fluff. This is biology. This is neurochemistry responding to directed thought. There's a system in your brain, your reticular activating system, that is designed to follow your focus. And when you say, I am capable of growth, I am learning, I am improving, you are instructing that system to look for proof. It will begin to show you opportunities. It will reframe failure as feedback. It will reinforce the identity you've declared. This is not about lying to yourself. This is not empty affirmations. This is training. You're not faking belief. You're forging it. There's a reason elite performers don't just visualize outcomes. They speak to who they are becoming. Because when your self-talk is grounded in identity, the behavior follows. So you don't need to force willpower when your brain already believes this is who you are. But it requires repetition, precision, discipline. So for 4 days, start every morning with words that activate your nervous system for clarity and strength. Say them like a truth, not a wish. Not a wish. Your neurons don't respond to hope. They respond to instruction. Speak these words before a workout, before a hard conversation, before the doubt creeps in. Say, I am wired for effort. I grow under pressure. I grow under pressure. Today, I am responsible for how I think, how I act, and who I become. And when your old thoughts show up, I can't do this. This is too hard. I'm not ready. You stop them like you would stop a fire. You replace them instantly, not with delusion, but with truth. You are ready. Not because everything is perfect, but because growth begins in discomfort. This is how the mind changes, not through inspiration, but through intentional repetition. 4 days of directed self-talk can create a momentum loop so strong, it begins to alter the trajectory of your behavior, your biology, your belief system. You don't have to scream it. You just have to mean it. You just have to mean it. B, talk to yourself like your future depends on it, because it does. And if you do it right, 4 days is all it takes to feel the shift. The system is already built inside you. The power was never outside. It's in your voice, your language, your nervous system. Use them wisely and watch your life change. Self-directed neuroplasticity is the process of intentionally guiding the brain's ability to change and adapt. At its core, it means you have the power to sculpt the architecture of your mind through focused thought, deliberate behavior, and conscious repetition. Your brain is not fixed. It is not a rigid machine that stops evolving at adulthood. Instead, it is dynamic, constantly reorganizing itself in response to what you think, feel, and do repeatedly. And that means every moment of intentional self-talk, every act of conscious reflection is a neural vote cast in the direction of who you are becoming. When you repeat a certain pattern of thought, whether it's I'm not good enough or I'm getting stronger every day, you are wiring that pathway into the structure of your brain. Neurons that fire together, wire together. This is not metaphorical, it's anatomical. When you reinforce an idea with emotion and attention, those neural circuits get stronger. They gain more synaptic density, more efficiency, and eventually they become your default. The mind becomes what it practices. That's the reason why so many people stay stuck in cycles of self-doubt or negativity. It's not because they're weak. It's because they've rehearsed that state unconsciously for years. But the moment you become aware of it, the moment you recognize that this internal script is just a well-worn pathway, not a permanent truth, you gain leverage. You can redirect the script. You can lay down new tracks. Self-directed neuroplasticity doesn't mean you just think happy thoughts. It means you bring conscious awareness to what you're rehearsing. You take ownership of your attention and deliberately pair it with the emotional states and mental narratives you want more of. For example, if you want more focus, you don't just wait to feel focused. You create micro moments of focus. You say, right now, I'm fully engaged. You eliminate distractions even for 5 minutes and lean in. That act done repeatedly builds the circuitry for attention. The same applies to confidence. You don't need external evidence first. You create internal experience by saying, I am someone who takes action even when unsure. Well, then you take the smallest step forward. That decision wires your brain to associate uncertainty with courage, not avoidance. And the more often you repeat that pattern, the more fluent your brain becomes at responding with courage rather than fear. This is self-directed plasticity in motion. Even your physiology listens to this process. The prefrontal cortex, the area responsible for executive function, self-awareness, and planning, becomes more active when you engage in intentional self-talk or reflection. At the same time, stress-related areas, like the amygdala, start to lose dominance This shifts the brain's default state away from reactivity and into grounded, deliberate control. So when you say to yourself, I am calm, I am present, I am capable, you're not just offering a mental mantra. You're reorganizing the control center of your biology, but none of this happens once. The brain doesn't change because of what you do occasionally. It changes because of what you do consistently. The neural circuits that get built are the ones that get used most often. So every time you repeat a new, empowering narrative, you're not just imagining a better future, you're constructing it. The science is clear. What you focus on, you become. What you say to yourself, you start to believe. And what you believe, you begin to live out. Self-directed neuroplasticity puts the steering wheel of your life back in your hands. It's not easy. It requires repetition, awareness, and emotional investment. But it works. The brain listens when you speak with intention. The question is, what are you training it to become? State-dependent learning is a principle rooted in both psychology and neurobiology that tells us something simple yet profound. The internal state you're in when you learn something will influence how well you remember and apply that learning later. In other words, your mood, your focus, your level of arousal, even your posture and breathing, all of it gets encoded along with the information you're absorbing. Your brain doesn't just record data, it records context. And that context can be the difference between retaining a life-changing insight and forgetting it completely. When you're in a state of stress, for example, your brain encodes that experience differently than it would you're in a calm or focused state. Stress activates your sympathetic nervous system, which prioritizes survival. Blood flow is directed away from the prefrontal cortex, which governs logic and reflection, and toward more primitive areas geared for fight or flight. This means the quality of your thinking and your learning is directly shaped by your internal state at the time. If you're trying to reprogram your beliefs or build a new habit, this principle becomes critical. You can't just repeat affirmations or intentions without regard to the state you're in. If you're distracted, anxious, or numbed out while doing self-talk, the signal doesn't land. Your brain won't take it seriously. But when you pair the message with emotional intensity, clarity, and presence, your nervous system flags it as important. It gets tagged for storage. That's when real change happens. When state and message align, the implications for behavior change are enormous. It means that to encode new beliefs effectively, you have to be in the right state. Want to teach yourself confidence? Then practice self-talk while standing tall, breathing deeply, with your attention anchored in the present moment. Tell yourself, I am prepared, heard. I move forward while your body and breath reflect that message. This synchrony sends a full system signal to the brain. This is real, this matters, and the brain listens. On the flip side, state-dependent learning also explains why old patterns are so hard to break. If you always practiced a skill or a thought process while in a state of fear or tension, your brain wired that emotion into the memory. Later, even if the environment changes, being in that same emotional state can trigger the old pattern. This is why people often regress under stress, not because they haven't grown, but because the state reactivates the old pathway. To truly rewire your behavior, you must learn to induce the desired state before repeating the behavior. That means you must learn to regulate your nervous system. Breathing patterns, posture, physical movement, even your inner visualizations all influence your state. A few minutes of intentional breath work before learning or reflecting can radically shift how deeply the information gets encoded. This is why it's powerful to combine self-talk with physiological cues. Sit upright, elongate your spine. Inhale slowly through the nose, and as you exhale, speak truth into your system, say, I am focused, or I am growing stronger with each effort, not just with your mind, but with your body fully behind it. The alignment between mind and physiology makes your message unforgettable. Repetition is key, but repetition in the right state is transformative. If you practice a behavior in the same state you want to access later, whether that's calmness, confidence, or focus, you make it easier to recall and embody that state when it really matters. You're training not just a thought or action, but the entire internal environment that supports it. Understanding state-dependent learning is understanding the conditions under which transformation is possible. You are not just a brain. You are a system. Your chemistry, your posture, your breath, your emotions, they are all part of the learning experience. And when you bring them into alignment, you become a powerful architect of your own change. The reticular activating system, or RAS, is a network of neurons located in the brainstem that plays a central role in attention, awareness, and perception. It acts as a filter between your conscious mind and the immense amount of information your brain receives every second. Imagine a gateway that decides what information gets through and what doesn't. That gateway is your RAS. Its primary function is to help you focus on what matters most by selectively directing your attention based on what you deem important, whether consciously or unconsciously. From a survival standpoint, this mechanism evolved to keep you alert to threats and opportunities. But in daily life, it means your RAS is constantly scanning your environment, looking for information that confirms what you already believe or what you've trained it to notice. And here's the critical point. The RAS doesn't operate on truth. It operates on relevance. That relevance is determined by what you think about, speak about, and emotionally invest in most often. When you repeatedly tell yourself something, I'm not enough, I always mess up, nothing ever works for me, your RAS starts to view those narratives as important. It doesn't question whether they're helpful or healthy. It just does its job, filtering in any information that supports that view and ignoring what doesn't. And then this is how limiting beliefs get reinforced over time. You start to notice only what aligns with your inner dialogue, and your reality begins to echo the quality of your thoughts. But the reverse is also true, and this is where the power lies. When you begin to intentionally direct your focus using self-talk that is aligned with who you want to become, I am capable. I notice opportunity. I take action. You start to train your RAS to look for those signals in the environment. Suddenly, solutions you once missed become visible. People and conversations that align with your growth begin to stand out. The brain starts to confirm the new narrative, not because your external world suddenly changed, but because your internal filter was rewired. This is why visualization and self-talk are so effective, not just as motivational tools, but as neurological directives. When you repeatedly visualize a desired outcome or speak empowering language to yourself, your RAS begins tagging those inputs as important. Then, without conscious effort, your attention is guided toward choices and actions that align with that vision. You might notice a resource you overlooked before, or feel compelled to act in a way that's congruent with your stated identity. This isn't magic. It's selective attention shaped by intention. The RAS also plays a crucial role in goal setting. When you define a goal clearly, especially when it's paired with emotion and specificity, you give your RAS a target. The clearer and more emotionally charged that target is, the more likely your RAS is to prioritize it. This is why vague goals often yield vague results. But when you say, I'm building a focused, disciplined life, and you pair it with daily repetition and emotional conviction, your RAS begins working in the background to support that outcome. It's also worth noting that your RAS is influenced not just by words, but by images and emotions. Yeah. The pictures you hold in your mind, the emotional states you dwell in, all serve as data points. Your nervous system doesn't separate imagined experience from real experience in the way we think. So when you visualize yourself succeeding, navigating difficulty, staying composed under pressure, your RAS begins to accept that as familiar, as relevant. It starts making it easier for you to embody that experience when the moment arrives. Ultimately, the RAS shows us that we are not passive recipients of reality. We are co-creators of it based on where we aim our attention. And the tool we use to direct that attention is our language, our vision, and our emotional focus. When you begin to guide your RAS deliberately, you don't just change what you see, you change what becomes possible. The autonomic nervous system is responsible for regulating the automatic functions of your body, things like heart rate, breathing, digestion, and pupil dilation. It operates beneath your conscious awareness, managing your internal state and reacting to both internal and external stimuli. It's divided into two primary branches. The sympathetic nervous system, which prepares the body for action, often called the fight or flight mode, and the parasympathetic nervous system, which promotes rest, recovery, and calm, often referred to as the rest and digest mode, rest take mode. The balance between these two systems determines how you feel, how you respond to stress, and how effectively you can focus, learn, and recover. What many people don't realize is that although the autonomic nervous system is automatic, it's not entirely outside your control. Through conscious practices like breath work, posture, internal dialogue, and even visualization, you can influence which branch of the system is more active in a given moment. This is known as autonomic nervous system regulation, and it's a powerful key to both mental performance and emotional stability. Every time you take a slow, deliberate breath, especially with an extended exhale, you're signaling to your body that you are safe. This activates the parasympathetic nervous system and brings down levels of stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline. Your heart rate lowers, your mind becomes clearer, and your body begins to prioritize repair, digestion, and cognitive function. You shift from a reactive state into a responsive one. And in this state, learning, reflection, and growth become not just possible, but efficient. On the other hand, shallow breathing, rapid speech, tension in the muscles, and negative internal dialogue can activate the sympathetic system. While that can be useful in short bursts, like during a workout or when quick decision-making is required, remaining in that heightened state over long periods drains your system. It makes it harder to focus, harder to recover, and harder to sustain motivation. Motivation. The sympathetic state was designed for brief, immediate threats, not the chronic psychological stressors that dominate modern life. This is where the role of self-talk becomes critical. When you say, "I can't handle this," or "this is too much," your system responds accordingly. Muscle tension increases, breathing becomes shallow, and the body prepares for a threat. But if in that same moment you consciously slow your breath and say, "I'm here, I'm grounded," I can take the next step, but your physiology shifts. This is not mental trickery. It is biological communication. Your nervous system listens to the language you use. This also explains why some people appear calm and composed under pressure. They've trained their nervous systems, either consciously or unconsciously, to default to regulation rather than chaos. They breathe before reacting. They pause before speaking. They recognize the rise of tension and redirect it rather than getting swept away by it. And this can be learned. Through deliberate practice, you can build the capacity to regulate your autonomic state even in high-stress environments. Movement, posture, and visual focus also play a role. Standing tall, maintaining an open chest, and widening your visual field, what's known as panoramic vision, can all send cues to the brain that you're not under threat. This allows for a quicker shift into the parasympathetic mode where clarity and perspective reside. When combined with intentional breath and constructive inner dialogue, these practices turn you into an active participant in your own nervous system's regulation. Ultimately, you don't have to be a slave to your stress responses. You can become fluent in the language of your body and learn to guide it into states that support your goals. Autonomic nervous system regulation is not about avoiding stress. It's about learning to navigate it skillfully with awareness and control. When you master this, you don't just feel better, you perform better, think clearer, and recover faster. You shift from surviving to adapting, from reacting to leading. Visualizing identity over outcome is one of the most powerful yet often overlooked tools in creating real lasting transformation. Most people set their sights on specific goals: losing weight, earning more money, building a relationship, landing a new job, and they visualize the outcome they want. They imagine the car, the body, the applause, or the bank account. While this can be temporarily motivating, it rarely leads to sustainable change. Why? Because your nervous system and your brain are not just driven by what you want, but by who you believe you are. When you focus on visualizing outcomes without shifting identity, there's a mismatch between your internal blueprint and your external desire. You might want to succeed, but if you still see yourself as someone who procrastinates, doubts, or gives up, your subconscious will sabotage the very progress you're trying to make. On the other hand, when you begin to visualize yourself not at the finish line, but in the process of becoming, acting, deciding, thinking, and moving like the person you want to be, you create a coherent internal model that your brain and nervous system can align with. Identity is sticky. It's more durable than motivation and more influential than desire. When you say, I am disciplined, and you consistently visualize yourself making hard choices, showing up early, doing the work even when no one is watching, you are rewiring how your brain sees you. This has a direct impact on your behavior. You begin to feel a deep inner conflict when you act in ways that contradict your identity. That conflict becomes a correction mechanism, pulling you back on course, not because of discipline alone, but because you're acting in alignment with the person you see yourself to be. Neurobiologically, this matters. The brain thrives on congruency. It wants your actions, emotions, and self-perception to line up. When you visualize outcomes, say, giving a great speech or winning a race, your brain generates a temporary burst of motivation. But when you visualize identity, being someone who trains daily, practices speaking even when it's hard, or handles failure with resilience, you're embedding new neural pathways that create a stable foundation. You're no longer relying on motivation. You're building a system. This identity-focused visualization also engages the deeper parts of your brain that influence decision-making under pressure. It recruits the insular cortex and prefrontal regions, areas responsible for integrating emotion, behavior, and long-term vision. You're teaching your brain through repetition and emotion that this is who I am now. And over time, the brain adapts to make that belief more accessible, more automatic, and more real. This process is not just mental, it's physiological. When you vividly imagine yourself being the kind of person you want to become, and you do it repeatedly with intensity, your nervous system starts to prepare for that reality. It calibrates your energy, your posture, your tone of voice, and even your hormonal balance to match that identity. You start to speak differently, move differently, and respond to setbacks with a sense of inner stability rather than defeat. You also reduce the inner conflict that so often derails change. When your identity is vague, but your outcome is clear, every step feels like an uphill battle. You're forcing behavior that doesn't yet belong to you. But when identity leads, behavior follows more naturally. You no longer have to force yourself to make aligned choices. They become the obvious choices, the expected ones. The shift is subtle but powerful. I need to eat healthy turns into I'm someone who fuels my body. I need to be more productive becomes I'm someone who finishes what they start. Over time, this changes your trajectory entirely. You're no longer chasing outcomes from the outside in. You're becoming the kind of person who naturally creates those outcomes from the inside out. You begin to lead your life from identity, not just intention. And that changes everything. Consistency over intensity is one of the foundational principles of real, sustainable change in both the brain and the body. While intense bursts of effort can feel exciting, even heroic, they rarely create lasting transformation. What wires the brain, builds identity, and restructures the nervous system isn't what you do once or twice with passion. It's what you do every single day, even if it's small. The brain doesn't adapt to what you think is important. It adapts to what you do repeatedly. That is how neuroplasticity works. That is how identity is reshaped. The nervous system thrives on repetition. When you engage in a habit, even for a few minutes, and you do it daily, you begin to form reliable neural pathways. These become more efficient over time, requiring less energy and willpower. The behavior goes from being a choice to being a part of who you are. That's why a person who journals for 5 minutes every day will make more progress in emotional regulation and self-awareness than someone who journals intensely for 2 hours once a month. It's not about how hard you push. It's about how often you show up. Intensity can feel meaningful in the moment. It produces a dopamine surge. You get that temporary feeling of significance, that internal narrative of, I'm really doing it. But The problem is intensity often burns out. It's unsustainable. It depends on emotion. It requires the right mood, the right setup, the perfect storm of motivation. And when those things aren't present, the behavior disappears. That leaves long gaps in repetition, and the brain forgets what it began to learn. The nervous system deconditions, and you lose traction. Consistency, on the other hand, builds trust with yourself. Every time you do what you said you do, even in a small way, you strengthen the internal circuitry of discipline and self-belief. You tell your nervous system, I follow through. That signal, repeated often enough, reshapes how you view yourself. It's not about having more willpower. It's about removing friction, lowering the barrier to action, and creating a rhythm that your body and brain can depend on. And this is especially true for internal change, mental, emotional, and behavioral patterns. You don't rewire anxiety by meditating for 1 hour when you're overwhelmed. You rewire anxiety by returning to your breath for just 2 minutes, several times a day after day after day. You don't build confidence by giving a single powerful speech. You build it by speaking clearly, standing tall, and choosing courage in hundreds of small moments when no one is watching. Over time, those repetitions become the new default. That's what the brain recognizes and encodes. Not drama, but consistency. This principle also applies to language. When you speak to yourself with care and clarity on a daily basis, even for just a few minutes, you begin to shift your internal dialogue. If you wait until the pressure is high to speak affirming truths, your nervous system might not believe you. But if you say daily, I keep my word, I do the hard thing, I focus on what matters, the brain starts to register that language as normal. You build a new baseline. You're not just saying different words, you're becoming a different person. It's not the size of the practice that matters, it's the presence of it. The small act done with awareness, repeated over time, beats the grand gesture done once in a while. This is how compound change is created. This is how the system, the neural networks, the hormone cycles, the behavioral patterns, starts to align with who you say you are. Not because you declared it once, but because you lived it daily. Consistency over intensity is not just a strategy, it's a mindset. It's the understanding that small choices made often lead to radical change, that the quiet, patient work of showing up again and again is what actually rewires the brain and redefines the self. The future you're building isn't waiting at the top of a peak effort. It's forming in every step you take, every day, no matter how small. Language is not just a method of communication. It is a biological tool that directly shapes the way your brain and body function. The words you say to yourself are not passive sounds echoing in the mind. They are active signals that influence neural pathways, hormonal responses, emotional states, and even immune system activity. Every sentence you repeat, every internal dialogue you entertain carries a physiological consequence. The body listens to language. The nervous system encodes it. The brain responds to it as if it were experience itself. When you speak, especially to yourself, you're engaging more than just thought. You're engaging motor neurons, respiratory rhythms, and emotional centers. You're triggering associations, memories, and predictions. The brain processes language in a distributed way, involving both the cortical regions responsible for logic and planning and the subcortical structures involved in emotion and instinct. When you tell yourself, I can't handle this, it's not just a thought, it's a command. Cortisol levels rise. Heart rate increases, focus narrows, the sympathetic nervous system prepares for collapse or conflict. But when you change the language, even slightly, the biology shifts with it. Saying, I don't have it yet, but I'm learning, or I can do hard things, tells the nervous system something different. It signals possibility instead of threat. It engages different neurochemical patterns. Dopamine levels increase slightly when your words point toward growth. And dopamine isn't just the reward molecule, it's the motivation molecule. It tells your system to keep going, to look forward, to anticipate success. This is why self-talk is more than a psychological trick. It's a regulatory tool. It helps stabilize your internal environment by directing attention, energy, and resources toward desired outcomes. And the repetition of certain words builds neural associations that influence automatic behavior. When you repeatedly tell yourself, I'm not focused, your brain becomes better at finding distractions. But if you train yourself to say, I bring my attention back, the brain begins to strengthen the pathways related to attention and executive control. Language also interacts with the immune system. Research has shown that negative self-talk, rumination, and hostile language can activate inflammatory markers. This isn't metaphorical, it's measurable. The body treats negative language as a form of stress. And over time, this wears down your resilience. On the other hand, affirming language, even if spoken softly and privately, has been shown to reduce inflammatory markers and support cellular repair. In this way, language becomes a tool for healing. The tone, rhythm, and repetition of your words matter too. Your nervous system is attuned to patterns. A slow, deliberate, calm tone of voice can trigger parasympathetic activation. This slows the heart rate and encourages recovery. That's why how you say something is often more important than what you say. A calm "I've got this," whispered with belief, is more powerful than a loud and frantic declaration. The system listens not only to the message, but to the frequency of delivery. Internal language also shapes perception. So here's the truth. Your life is not shaped by chance. It's shaped by your focus, your actions, and most powerfully, the words you repeat to yourself. You are not waiting for transformation. You are rehearsing it with every thought, every breath, every moment of self-talk. Your brain listens.